Friends, our scripture lesson today is taken from the Gospel according to Luke, chapter 21, verses 5 through 19. When some were speaking about the temple, how it was adorned with beautiful stones and gifts dedicated to God, he said, "As for these things that you see, the days will come when not one stone will be left upon another. All will be thrown down." They asked him, "Teacher, when will this be, and what will be the sign that this is about to take place?" And he said, "Beware that you are not led astray, for many will come in my name and say, 'I am he,' and the time is near. Do not go after them. When you hear of wars and insurrections, do not be terrified, for these things must take place first, but the end will not follow immediately." Then he said to them, "Nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes, and in various places famines and plagues, and there will be dreadful portents and great signs from heaven. But before all this occurs, they will arrest you and persecute you. They will hand you over to synagogues and prisons, and you will be brought before kings and governors because of my name. This will give you an opportunity to testify. So make up your minds not to prepare your defense in advance, for I will give you words and a wisdom that none of your opponents will be able to withstand or contradict. You will be betrayed even by parents and brothers, by relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death. You will be hated by all because of my name, but not a hair of your head will perish. By your endurance, you will gain your souls." Well, that's a nice, happy text. Yeah. So, they say never, right? They say never. But I can tell you, one of the things I will never do, I will never run a marathon. All right? I assure you that that is just not something that is in my past or in my future. But I sometimes like reading about things that I'm never going to do. And one of the things that I always was curious about was how you prepare for a marathon. And one of the things I learned was that marathoners don't run marathons every day. So, sometimes we think you prepare for something by doing it. They don't. So I thought, if you're going to run a marathon, it's 26 miles. If you want to do it, then probably you ought to run like 50 miles every day, right? You should just do it and do it and do it. But apparently, their insides would turn to mush if they tried to do that. It's just too much abuse. And so they don't. They actually don't run, 26 miles until it's race day. Okay? So they don't actually do it. And that's one of the things about preparation. When Jesus talks about being prepared, there's a couple of different kinds of preparation. See, oftentimes we think about preparation as practice. Okay, practice, music. You just play it, you play the piece, you play it again, you play it again, you play it again until you get it right. When you're cooking a recipe, you practice the recipe. You cook it, you make it again, you make adjustments, you make it again until you get it right. But that's only something that applies to certain things. Practice is actually a very limited form of preparation. It's not the only way in which we get ready for something, okay? And Jesus is talking about getting ready for the kinds of things that you can't practice for. It's talking about getting ready for the kinds of things you cannot practice for. He talks about this time where there's going to be tremendous calamity. And then the first question that the disciples ask him, I just thought was a curious question. When will this be? When? Not talking about anything else, just when will this be? But it struck me about one thing. When is the question of the unprepared? Okay? Like, teacher announces a test. There's going to be a test. If you know the stuff cold, you don't care when it's going to be. Right? If you know the subject matter, you don't care when the test is going to be. You're ready. You know the stuff. When is the test? Means you're not ready. Okay? When you ask when, you're not ready. When is the question of the unprepared. And so they're like, I'm not ready. This stuff is coming. We're not ready for this. So Jesus, when is it going to be? I need to know when, because we are not ready to face this. They're not ready to face this stuff that Jesus talks about. He talks about earthquakes and famines and plagues. And one of the things that you need to remember about this is that this isn't even necessarily literal. okay, in terms of what he's talking about. One of the ways we know this is that, for example, that phrase famines and plagues, in Greek, it's wordplay, because in Greek it's limoi and loimoi. So it's limoi e loimoi. And so when you hear that kind of thing in the Greek, you realize that he's choosing those words because of the way they flow. You know, it's going to be limoi e loimoi. Okay, so it's wordplay. It's not necessarily a literal description where he's choosing the best word. He's clearly just choosing words that flow poetically, that you can remember. And so you don't know what it's actually going to be. You don't know what you're looking for. And on top of that, you often hear when calamities happen, people go, oh, it's a sign of the end times and stuff like that. Except there's one little thing that he says in here that's kind of interesting. He talks about the earthquakes, the famines, the plagues, and then he says, but before all this occurs. What? Those are signs. Wait a second. Before all this occurs, they will arrest you and persecute you and hand you over to synagogues and prisons. Wait a second. I thought those were the signs that were going to warn me that this was going to happen. I don't actually care what happens after I've been arrested, persecuted, tortured, and something like that, okay? So he's not even telling you when it's going to be, because this stuff, which is really more personal, this is the stuff I really worry about, okay? This is going to happen first. Before all this occurs, they will arrest you and persecute you. The signs are later. The signs are just telling you that this is of God. But what's coming is unknown. It's unknown what it is, and it's unknown when it's going to be. And yet, Jesus is talking about getting ready. And so that's one of the things that we need to remember about faith. Faith doesn't protect you from the unexpected. It helps you cope with the unexpected. See, too many people think that faith is supposed to be this kind of magic shield that they erect around themselves so that this kind of calamity, this kind of stuff won't touch them, won't affect them. They start to think that, oh, if I just pray the right prayers and I do the right things and I behave the right way, then somehow this stuff isn't going to touch my life, or it's not going to touch the life of my loved ones. But that's not the way faith works. Faith does not protect us from these unexpected things occurring. Faith is about helping us to understand that we can cope with it. Faith helps us cope with what's coming. Faith reminds us that no matter what comes, God is with us through it. Faith is that reminder of that promise that Jesus says that I will give you words, that in that time you will not be alone. I will give you the words at the time. But what he says there is kind of interesting. Make up your minds not to prepare your defense in advance. Make up your minds not to decide what it's going to be, not to know what the troubles are going to be, not to know what you're going to be accused of. Make up your minds not to be prepared in that way, but rather be prepared to trust. Make up your minds to know that when the time comes, when these horrific things happen in your life, that you're going to trust God to give you what you need in that moment to make it through. That's a different kind of preparation. And yet, that's actually the kind of preparation that we tend to give people for life. And it's actually the most important kind of preparation. See, too many times, like when they talk about education, when we talk about schools, they talk about giving kids particular skills, okay? And particular skills are important, but there are a few things we learn about certain particular skills. First of all, a lot of them go out of date. I can tell you that having been trained, as a chemist, pretty much Most of the things that I learned about chemistry in the 70s are now antiquated, automated. Okay, those particular skills aren't that relevant anymore. All right. I did a lot of work with computers, but it's been enough time now that if you sat me down in front of one of them and had me program it, I'd be a little lost in what's currently happening. Particular skills are often time limited in their function because new things happen, new things are developed. But the real preparation that we give kids is things that are not so specific. Character is the main one. See, the best preparation we give kids for life, that we give people for life, is character development. All right? When you develop character in a kid, they're ready for most of the things that are going to happen. All right? You want to develop character. You want to develop ways of thinking. Like one of the things that I remember so much from my college days that they used to talk about a lot was they used to say that the most important skill, the number one skill you needed, was to simply be able to analyze a situation. That if you knew how to analyze a problem, how to analyze a situation, you were most of the way home. In fact, even in science, even in some of the classes like physics, if you didn't even have the mathematical skills or didn't have the time to finish calculating out all the equations, if you set them up properly, you got most of the credit. They said you got most of the credit just for setting up the equations. Even if you just described them and said, what I need to do is balance this against this, blah, blah, blah. If you could describe it and set it up properly, you got most of the credit. Because they understood that if you set it up properly, you can get to the right answer. And they just wanted to know, are you set up to get to the right answer? If you're set up to get to the right answer, you know what to do. Are we setting up people to get to the right answers in life? We set people up by developing their character. We set people up by having them see the world as it ought to be. And that's one of the things that Jesus is talking about here in kind of a subtle way. He's teaching us to see the world as God sees it. And that is so often different, radically different from the way we tend to see it. And it's kind of, I think, highlighted in this verse that Jesus says. It always kind of confused me because I always reacted to it kind of strangely when he says, all right, you'll be betrayed and they will put some of you to death, but not a hair of your head will perish. Wait a second. Well, excuse me, I'm a little confused by this, Jesus. What do you mean we'll put some of you to death, but not a hair of your head will perish? I mean, I'll be dead, but my hair is going to be great? I don't get it. I don't understand. Until you understand something that's a little, it's translated appropriately, but there's something about that word perish. It doesn't mean die. It means destroyed. You'll be dead, but you won't be destroyed. You might die, but you won't be destroyed. And too many people think, wait a second, dead is destroyed. But it's actually central to our faith. Dead is not destroyed. And so much of this passage sets apart these ideas that are out there in the world. Like he talks about the temple, right? He begins by saying, look at this temple, look at this enormous temple. And you need to know how big that was. These stones were tens of feet tall. I mean, a single stone, one of the stones of the temple was the size of a good-sized apartment in New York City. All right? These were huge stones stacked upon one another. And then they were clad in gold. You could see the temple gleaming from mountaintops that were facing that mountain, okay? It was so amazing. That's why when Jesus talks about this being brought down, they couldn't imagine a structure like that being brought down. It was just too massive. But what he's teaching us there is that fundamentally our perceptions of what is lasting and what is fleeting are backwards. We think that the things we're building in this life are the things that are going to last. You see people, right, they donate things and they build these wonderful buildings and they slap their name on it and they think, oh, this is going to last. It's not. It'll last for a while, not forever. And then we think that so many other things that are kind of just ephemeral are fleeting. But those are the things that last. Love, compassion, kindness. These things that we can't bottle up or box or put into a building, those are actually the things that last. And all the physical things in this life are the things that go away. And if you're going to analyze the world, if you're going to think about the world and be able to analyze it appropriately so that you can decide what to do, you need to have these perceptions correct. You will not make good decisions in this life if you act as if there is no eternity. As if you act as if this is all there is. Because we know people who believe that, right? We know people whose worldview is that this is all there is. And that will cause them to make decisions that are at odds with understanding that this is not all there is. Those who choose to protect themselves at all costs will make decisions that are at odds with those who understand that even if you put me to death, I am not destroyed. I will not perish. And when we come to know these things, we develop into being the people that God would have us be. Jesus says at the end of this passage, he says, by your endurance, you will gain your souls. And that word endurance is not talking about the endurance of that actual trial at the end. He's not talking about the endurance of being, interrogated or even tortured or whatever. The endurance, that word means patient waiting in the Greek. It's a word that means patient waiting. It means by your waiting for this time, by your working toward this time, by your developing of yourself so that you are ready for this time when it happens, you will gain your souls. And to gain your soul is to discover, to become that essence of life, that word that gets translated as soul is this Greek word psyche, from which we get words like psychology and stuff like that, or psyche, all right? It's a word that refers to the essence of who you are. As you patiently wait, as you develop your character, as you develop your worldviews to align it with God's, in anticipation of these unknown perils that will come at an unpredictable time, you will gain the essence of who you are. You will become the person that you're supposed to be, aligned with life as it truly is, seeing things as they truly are, and not the way we're taught to see them. Because so much of what we're taught is actually backwards from what life is. We're taught to protect ourselves. We're taught not to be as generous as we ought to be. We're taught to take care of ourselves first. We're taught to protect rather than give. But what we learn in faith is that many of those basic rules are just backwards. That we gain by giving. That we gain by losing. That the first shall be last. Think about how many times Jesus' teachings are predicated on a reversal from what we consider to be common sense. And it's because the world that God is preparing us to live in is not this one. It works differently. And to be ready for it is to gain that life that is aligned with what's going to be. And that's going to take us through the kinds of trials, the kinds of troubles that we hope we won't face. And I've never read passages like this and presumed that it had to happen to the whole world in order for it to be applicable to my life. Because calamity, trial, tribulation, if it's happening to you, it is your whole world. When it's happening to you, it is everything. A story that I've often told is I knew a woman who totally missed 9/11. Why? Because she spent the entire day sitting in a hospital room with her dying mother. The TVs were off. She was just there as her mother was passing away. She emerged from that to find out what had happened. But she had missed it. Because what seemed like calamity to us, actually in her world wasn't the calamity. The calamity was that her mom was dying. And so it doesn't have to be for everybody to suffer this in order for this passage to be meaningful to you. You will have that unexpected time of trial, that unexpected tribulation, that unjust happening. It happens to each of us. And the preparation for it is to know that when it happens, God's there with you. Amen.